Welcome in to Football and Other F Words, Morning Edition, NPR Edition. My name is Zach Lyons, and I'm going to be calm like this the whole episode because nothing happened in the last 24 hours, did it, Mike? It was all just chilling, and everybody expected nothing to happen, and everything happened. And I think it was great to get it all out of the way. I was stunned, and we'll get to all the comments and everything. I was stunned by everything that came out as far as the words being said. So that's our main thing. The Mike Vrabel and Amy Adams-Strunk talked, but did you listen? And if you're joining us and you're a Broadway insider and you're joining us, which I probably have to get in here real quick because the post got all screwed up. Let me do something here. The post got all screwed up earlier in the day because you and your time changes and your child that is ruining everything in my life. Started new daycare today, and that screwed everything up. And so the articles are being a little tricky. So let me get this out here real quick.
Just that's what children are. They are just day exploders. You never know when it's going to come, but inevitably one of your days is just going to be exploded on an almost weekly basis.
All right, I tweeted it out, so now people should be coming in and everything. It didn't automatically go out. So if you're joining us, as you pile in here, we'll take your questions and your answers. But while this show may be an afterthought because of Mike's child, he has us as an afterthought. You know who's not an afterthought, Mike? Our sponsors, Jaspers. They're not an afterthought. In fact, they're at the forefront of everybody's mind. They are indeed the next evolution of Sports Bar. They have everything that you want, and I get it. Football season is effectively over for Tennessee Titans, but if you need to go watch a place to go watch football games, or if you said, hey, I was not miserable enough in 2022 and 2020 in the beginning of 2023. I need to watch more bad sports teams. Go watch the Predators play. They are a great place, a Predators bar, if you will, to go watch the Predators. Just be terrible more likely than not. So go to Jasper's 2-for-1 on Sundays. They have game nights. They have all kinds of stuff for you. Screens everywhere.
Preds are on a winning streak, though. They're streaking.
Hey, Titans were on a winning streak too. Spare me these winning streaks. All right, Mike. We don't really want to talk about the game, but let's just do a quick recap. The defense game plan was stupid. No pass rush whatsoever. So the defense that you really need to help mitigate the disaster that was Josh Dobbs in the second half just really didn't show up. Now, I get it. The points and everything were way down low, but really that was because Trevor Lawrence, the elite savior, the next quarterback of this generation, the next Peyton Manning, whatever bullshit people put on him during this Jaguars win streak that they've had, who only threw one touchdown the last 3 games, including that game, missed a bunch of open throws. He was terrible for the most part. So defense let you down a little bit. No pass rush. But Josh Dobbs, oh my gosh, the first half tweets about Josh Dobbs. He's the next quarterback. Everybody going crazy. And there's a guy in it for the kicks on Twitter, and he said, I think we need to settle down about this Josh Dobbs, and 17's probably still going to be around. And I said, just waiting for him to turn into a Mike White pumpkin, right? Because Mike White was always destined to be bad because Mike White is a bad quarterback. Not necessarily that Josh Dobbs is a bad quarterback, but he turned into a pumpkin at the worst possible time, specifically the fumble. Your thoughts, not necessarily on whether it was a fumble or not, but your thoughts on just that play and what Josh Dobbs failed to do.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was ball security with him. And this is literally exactly what I wrote about on Polkarski.com last week was Dobbs played well. He should have been the starter. He was better than Malik Willis. The offense moved, was ran efficiently with him. He made some plays, but ball security was an issue. It was an issue against Cowboys, and it popped up again in the second half of this game with the arm punt interception to Burks, which I don't know if his arm was hit or what happened there, but Burks was open deep. I mean, there's so many. And then, of course, like the turnover then into the season, basically. There are so many little bitty, tiny things that could have gone a different way that would have won the Titans this game, which is crazy considering, this was in Jacksonville. This was a Jags team that was as fired up as you could possibly be for this game versus a Titans team that just came limping in with a quarterback off the street. It's so close, but I do think that was an incomplete pass. I don't think it was a fumble. You'll never convince me that his hand was not moving forward when he lost control.
I didn't ask. No, we're not talking about it because you're wrong, but so we're not talking about it. So we're going to move on to the fourth down play that was utterly ridiculous for a fucking rocket scientist. Even, I'm not even a rocket scientist. I don't even play quarterback in the NFL, but fourth down, you're checking it down 10 yards short of the stick. Are you a fucking idiot? Like, that is horrible.
Yeah, it was terrible. Like, I could not believe, like, literally could not believe, because once they started using the timeouts, which I'm not totally sure they should have used the timeouts where they did. They were kind of in a bad spot either way, but the 3 timeouts always allows you to force a 3 and out and get the ball back for like one more try without the opposing team being able to run more than 15 seconds off the clock, basically. So I kind of thought maybe they'll hold on to the timeouts, and if this drive needs to, be reset, they'll just punt it and try to get the 3 and out and go again. But once they used that first time out, they were basically locked into that drive. And I could not believe on fourth down and 12 or something like that he throws short of the sticks.
4th and 15, I feel
like. It was bad enough when he threw the check down. I mean, he really didn't have a choice because he was under pressure, but he threw the check down.
No, he was protected on that play.
To Haskins?
No, well, the fourth down play call.
The third, I'm talking about the third down.
One before that.
He throws the third down check down to Haskins, which I already thought, God, can you not find something a little bit more down the field than that? I mean, I would have rather taken 2 shots to Treylon Burks to try to, draw pass interference or just have, Burks go make a 50-50 play. I would have rather taken 2 shots at that than take the check down that got you like 4 yards and then having a 4th and long where you had everything all right on it. But yeah, the throwing short of the sticks, just a monumentally stupid decision from a really smart guy. So unfortunate.
That was going to be the Josh Dobbs experience. I think people got a little head over heels, which is, it's UT fan base. What do you expect?
He was great in the first half. Like, he really was. Yeah. He was really good in the first half. But I mean, again, like, he's a guy that's barely played football in 6 years. So
I guess here's where I stand on this. I think Dobbs should be looked at as the quarterback 2 or the early front runner to be quarterback 2 behind Ryan Tannehill, but you still need to upgrade the quarterback 2 position to someone who can actually win you a game if he has to go in. He's now lost 2 games, and now the first one is just you're outmatched. But this one, firmly in hand, he made 3 bad decisions. He can't, or 2 bad decisions, and he can't for the life of him throw that ball to Treylon Burks deep is crazy. It's just crazy to me. I mean, Burks was wide open. So while he can run the offense to a certain degree, you still need to upgrade that quarterback 2. Depending on what Malik Willis does in the offseason, who the offensive coordinator is, maybe it could be Malik Willis and Josh Dobbs only battling out. In best case scenario, Malik Willis beats them. But I still think you need to bring in someone other than like Kevin Hogan or Logan Woodside to come in for this quarterback 2 spot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think Dobbs is better than Logan Woodside, right?
Yeah.
So I think they've at least moved in somewhat of a right direction. And look, also, we've bitched all year about the supporting cast, and Dobbs had an atrocious supporting cast for both of these games, particularly on the offensive line where, they're starting Jordan Roos, they're starting Corey Levin, Dennis Daly's corpse is still out there. It's just like, I mean, a disastrous offensive line, which remains the root of their issues, I think. But could they do better at backup quarterback? Sure. But I don't know that it's a bad thing if they go into next season with Dobbs and Malik competing.
So let's talk about next season, because Amy Adams-Strunk and Mike Vrabel just took big old press dumps all over Jon Robinson, pretty much. I mean, say what you want if you want to, because there are the Jon Robinson truthers that are still out there that say that Well, what Amy Adams said is just a puff piece, and it doesn't really matter. Let me tell you something. She says the word collaborator or collab in 4 different times.
Yeah.
That should let you know that if Jon Robinson did these things, if Jon Robinson was all of these things that she lists that she's looking for, an innovator and someone that is open to innovation and evaluating talent beyond the traditional avenue, someone who's a collaborator, he'd still have his fucking job. But he's not those things. It's pretty obvious that he's not those things. And we'll get to Mike Vrabel's press conference, but Mike Vrabel went into like some extreme detail about the analytics that they use during practice and during games. And again, and he mentioned stuff about collaboration, which is the same 2 things. There's a clear message here that they're talking about Jon Robinson without talking about Jon Robinson. So what did you take away from her comments as a whole? And what did you think? Because I think, obviously, exceptional talent evaluator, exceptional at roster building, someone's an excellent decision maker. Well, duh. That's what you want every GM to be. But I think the more nuanced answer about the traditional avenues for innovation and evaluating and the collaboration is massive.
Yeah, I think the collaboration comments are certainly part of what jumped out to me. But to me, like the biggest thing that jumped out of this whole thing was, I mean, she gave us what the structure is going to be, right? Mike Vrabel, she said Mike Vrabel and this new GM will report directly to me, which is different because Mike Vrabel was under Jon Robinson previously. So it is now going to be more of a head coach and GM combination as far as like the top decision making in the Titans organization. I think we all expected that. I think that's all kind of, I mean, there were reports within minutes of Jon Robinson's firing of Mike Vrabel was going to get more control, and hey, here it is. But I think that tells you what the structure is going to be, and I think that's probably the most. That's the thing I could take the most out of this. I mean, and once you know the structure, they're definitely going to have to collaborate because they're basically peers at that point. It's going to be Mike Vrabel and this new GM making decisions together. And when it comes to personnel, I'm sure, you know, the new GM likely is going to have control of the draft and free agency and all this other stuff. But I would imagine Mike Vrabel either gets control of the 53-man roster as far as like final cuts, or at least is given a big say in the kind of players that they're bringing in. I mean, even in the draft, you know, I would imagine Vrabel gets not necessarily veto power, but you know, like Amy Adams-Strunk is saying, that she wants them to collaborate and be on the same page. And I always thought that Vrabel and Robinson were largely on the same page, but maybe they weren't. Like, you know, the comments coming out of Vrabel's presser suggest that maybe they weren't necessarily
like they
on
were.
the same page.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like they were on what they're looking for in terms of the players and everything. And we'll get to that in a second. You know, I want to touch on this innovation and evaluate talent beyond the traditional avenues. And this will lead us into the GM candidates themselves, because I think a lot of these guys do fall under that the analytics approach. And I said when Jon Robinson was fired and the joke was made, well, they're just not going to use analytics. And I said that, hold up now. I think Mike Vrabel is open to using analytics, but we've seen him kind of dismiss it, but he doesn't like the general questions, because what you saw in his presser is like, tell me where you want me to tell you about analytics, and I'll tell you how we use it in a certain situation. Then he dove into it, and you couldn't get him to shut the fuck up, which was great. It's great to see, great to hear. On the flip side, Jon Robinson has specifically said, I am the analytics department. I believe in how football's been played since the 1970s, and this has worked since then and always has worked, and it will continue to work. And he's also said, you know, that he doesn't even change up for a fucking disaster, a pandemic, his own approach to the draft. Now, he regrets that, but nothing has changed in his approach. He's a traditionalist. He's a traditionalist as a general manager. He has basically admitted it. So it is awesome to see that she's looking for the opposite of that. And Vrabel coincides with that. Vrabel is like, I use analytics all the time on the field.
And I think that's been Vrabel's, consistent answer when the analytics thing has been brought up is that, yes, we do use analytics, and what analytics looks like and how it's employed by various teams can be wildly different. I mean, I think every team uses analytics to some degree because, like, you're looking, and Vrabel's made this point before, you're looking at tendencies, and that's part of coaching. Like, part of coaching is you're looking for what is their run rate on third and 3 or less. What do we need to look? Where do they break as far as like this is definitely going to be a pass, things like that. And different teams are different, so they use charting and things like that to provide numbers for that. That is analytics. It's not like the most advanced version of analytics, but it is analytics. And it does seem like Vrabel is open to it. I know he gets this reputation as like a caveman because he's this big, strong former player who's got this kind of gruff
People are body shaming him.
And people,
he's a big caveman, and people are body shaming him. It's
people lump him into this like, oh, he's a meathead caveman, all this stuff. But anybody who has ever talked about Mike Vrabel has always talked about how smart he is and how intelligent he is, and all these different things. I'm not sure. I don't think the Titans are on the cutting edge of any of this stuff. And I think that should be an emphasis for Amy Adams-Strunk. And it doesn't have to be something that Mike Vrabel is necessarily like desperately begging for, but I think the new GM needs to be able to present him with this information and say, here is information. You use it how you choose, but I'm going to give you a department that will give you additional information about your players, about your scheme, about what teams around the league are doing, and you can use it to your advantage. And I think Vrabel would be open to that. I certainly don't think Vrabel is going to say, oh, no, I'm not going to look at this information because it's, generated by a computer. I don't think he's that kind of meathead. I think he's intelligent. And I think he's certainly willing to listen to other ideas and collaborate. So, yeah, I am encouraged by the fact that it sounds like Vrabel's open to that. That I desperately hope Amy Adams-Strunk goes with somebody who's a little bit more forward-thinking than Jon Robinson. Because while I think Jon Robinson did a good job, that was always one of our pet peeves with him and his front office. And if you listen to Kevin Clark interviews or, talk about sometimes that he's talked to Jon Robinson in the past, Kevin Clark from The Ringer, constantly talks about Jon Robinson and like, he's just kind of this good old boy, like wants to talk about his hunting dogs and all this stuff. And has no interest whatsoever in analytics. Like he always would say, Jon Robinson just is not in that mold. I hope they go in a different direction there because I do think that's the way the NFL is going.
I think they are. I don't think they're hiring any of the internal candidates. I think they're just kind of doing them a favor by publicly saying that they're going to interview them for the job to kind of help them get other jobs and maybe other opportunities, kind of like a PR move, for a behind-the-scenes PR move. Because if you look at the list, because this is what was great about Amy Adams-Strunk, because this article comes out and I'm fighting with Jon Robinson, enthusiasts who think that he does no wrong and everything, and that Amy Adams-Strunk is stuck in the past and nobody is going to be hired externally. They're not even. I even had someone say they weren't even going to interview anyone externally, which I thought was just the most asinine thing to ever say. And sure enough, like I'm in the middle of this argument, not like 4 minutes into this argument, they say that they're interviewing Rand Carthen and Adam Peters. And I'm saying, there you go. There you go. There's you two external candidates. And they just kept pouring in. We're talking Rand Carthen, Adam Peters, Quentin Harris, Malik Boyd, Glenn Cook, Ian Cunningham, all coming in. And the 5 of those are minority candidates that she's already talked to. Because I said they released in December the list of front office minority candidates that were going to be sent from teams to go down with the owners to the owners meeting in December. They also did one in May, but specifically the one in December is after Jon Robinson got fired. And I said, Amy Adams-Strunk is going to get a leg up on interviewing some candidates. And sure enough, 5 of the candidates, Rand Carthen, Quentin Harris, Malik Boyd, Glenn Cook, Ian Cunningham, were all there. And Malik Boyd was the only one that wasn't there in May. The rest of the 4 were there in May. So she's already started. And she even said specifically, We started about 4 weeks ago, which is exactly when that owners meeting was. And she's bringing in these guys because she was thoroughly impressed with what they do, with what they said, with how they carried themselves inside the owners meetings, because they job shadowed and went into these meetings with that are normally for owners, general managers, and assistant general managers. And really, nobody else goes in those meetings from the team. So that was their first experience. In fact, the Buffalo News had an interview with Terrence Gray and Malik Boyd, who Malik Boyd is the one that's being interviewed for this GM position here at the Tennessee Titans. And they talked about how great it was. It was a great experience. It really works to get your name out there and talking to people and networking. And it was cool to be in the meetings. So I say all that to come back to what she said she has put into action. She has brought innovative minds. Specifically, you can't get probably more analytics forward than Glenn Cook from the Cleveland Browns. In fact, you go.
Yeah.
Let me say this: when you're talking about offensive coordinators and GM candidates, you need to go to Reddit and you need to go to the team that they're coming from, their Reddit page, and you're going to find a lot of information. And when I went to the Cleveland Browns, and we'll start off with Glenn Cook, when I went to the Cleveland Browns Reddit, they specifically said, wow, can't believe Tennessee is actually going to go full on analytics, because that is what Glenn Cook is.
That is, and that's one of the themes too, I think. So if you look, Glenn Cook comes from the Browns, which is one of the more forward-looking analytics departments in football, or analytics front offices in football. And you also look at like Ian Cunningham from the Bears, who is one of my favorite candidates, cut his teeth under Ozzie Newsome. This is a pet peeve of mine. People will see, oh, he's from the Bears, he must suck because the Bears suck. No, he's been there for what, a year, 2 years now at this point. He came up under Ozzie Newsome, was, kind of mentored by Ozzie in the Ravens front office, and then came over when Ryan Poles was hired for the Bears. Ryan Poles also, more of an analytics forward-thinking general manager. We'll see how he ends up building the Bears, right? Like that's still yet to be seen. The proof of that front office has not been, finalized yet. They've got a long way to go, obviously, but I think, Ian Cunningham, Malik Boyd from the Bills. The Bills are obviously a very successful organization. They do use analytics as well there. And the 49ers. The 49ers, one of the best organizations in football right now. So the only outlier to me here is like Quentin Harris, which I've heard, he's highly thought of around the league and things like that. But as far as, being in the organization, he's been with the Cardinals for a long time. Steve Keim is not the front office I would want to model here in Tennessee. So that would be my least favorite pick right now.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I had Quentin Harris up at the top because I think I had heard what you heard, that the people in the media have said that him and Adrian Wilson are really good next generation candidates for general manager. Yeah. But you go to the Arizona Cardinals message boards and Reddit, they specifically say, quit hiring from inside the building. These guys have only learned under Steve Keim, and that's their only experience in the NFL is with the Arizona Cardinals, and Steve Keim is an idiot. That's basically what they're saying. Yeah. And I've always, thought of Steve Keim as well respected, but over the last few years, he's really trailed off. And do you really want to bring in a guy? Hiring Quentin Harris and Adrian Wilson is basically hiring Monty Austin, Fort, and Ryan Cowden to me at this point, because you're hiring just carbon copy clones of probably the previous GM that they were under, and you're probably not going to get a lot out of it. And I think the inexperience. So I am with you. I'm completely out on Quentin Harris at this point. I'm going to move him down actually a few tiers later on down the road when I do probably another tweet if anybody else comes in. But everything that I've researched on Quentin Harris is like, yeah, I am, as far as all the external candidates, I'm out on him. I'm not as high on Ian Cunningham as you are, just because I think I want a little bit more experience in the position that he's in, before he comes over. So that narrows down for me Glenn Cook, Rand Carthen, Adam Peters, and Malik Boyd. And I specifically want to dive into, obviously, San Francisco 49ers, because I do like Malik Boyd. I do like Glenn Cook. But let's be honest, the prize of this candidate list is one of the two guys from the San Francisco 49ers for the general public of our listeners and everything. And Adam Peters, oh boy, you want to talk about lighting a fan base on fire. If he was hired away from the San Francisco 49ers, this fan base would be livid. The San Francisco 49ers would be carrying pitchforks and torches, demanding that, hey, don't sign the contract, Adam Peters. Don't go over to the Tennessee Titans or wherever he may go. Let's either get John Lynch in the booth somewhere and away from the team, or let's give John Lynch like a vice president CEO title and make Adam Peters GM. They would rather have Adam Peters as GM than John Lynch. That should tell you everything about him. Adam Peters has 3 Super Bowl rings with the Patriots and the Broncos. He is like when you talk about Von Miller, Chris Harris, and Malik Jackson, a core group of defenders for the Denver Broncos on their Super Bowl run, he's the guy that everybody associates. Like, those guys are on the team basically because of Adam Peters. George Kittle. There's a huge article up about George Kittle and about Adam Peters being the guy that basically said he's a 3rd-round grade, but nobody else is going to have him as a 3rd-round grade. So let's grab him in the 5th. Let's just risk it and grab him in the 5th. That was Adam Peters. And if you're a team like the Tennessee Titans who needs a franchise quarterback, a young franchise quarterback, it has not worked out for the San Francisco 49ers, but he was the biggest proponent inside the building of Trey Lance. Luckily, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan were also in on Trey Lance. They kind of like kept their cards hidden. There's a story behind there that they didn't want to influence anybody's decision. But he's a big proponent and supporter of Trey Lance, and he traded up from pick 12 to pick 3 to get their guy, because that was the guy, and that he's like, we're all on the same page. Let's go get him. So he was involved in that. So you can't do really worse than Adam Peters. I mean, like, this is kind of everything that this team needs is wrapped up in Adam Peters.
I would agree with that. I think he's probably my favorite choice from a standpoint of he's got the most experience. He comes from a winning organization. And the thing for me with him is that he came over with John Lynch, right? Or was he there before John Lynch?
I think he came with John Lynch. He came with John Lynch because I read about this, because he's from Cupertino. So
Okay.
This is going to be really hard to pull him away from where he's grown up, and he's been a 49ers fan his whole life. So it's going to be really hard to pull this off to get him. I'm like, you're going to have to – everything's going to have to go right for the Adam Peters to work. But he came over to John Lynch because he turned down staying with the Broncos and learning to be and being the GM in waiting at the Broncos just so he could be in his hometown for his hometown team and have and learn from John Lynch.
And here's the thing too. And from what I understand, Peters has more or less been the primary personnel guy for the 49ers, in that, John Lynch obviously did not have a personnel background before he came to the Niners. He came from TV, obviously former player with a lot of connections and things like that, which, helped him land that job. But, and he's done a good job managing, obviously. Like, you got to give John Lynch some credit. But from what I understand, Peters is kind of the main scout on that side, as far as the front office goes. So Peters deserves a lot of credit for building what the 49ers are, and which, to me, the 49ers are the most talented team in football. Outside of quarterback, which obviously, you set aside your situation with Fields, or not Fields, with Trey Lance getting hurt. And it is what it is. But the 49ers,
he pounded the table for Brock Purdy. Basically,
yeah,
the later round guys, he's most connected with the later round guys in the 4th and 5th round, 6th round. But he's done stuff in the earlier rounds. But he pounded the table for Brock Purdy.
Yeah. I mean, this is a franchise that, they drafted Brandon Ayuk. They drafted Deebo Samuel. They have crushed the draft and
traded for Trent Williams. They go out and trade for players because they need them.
They're aggressive to get the guys in that they need. Look, I think he is the best candidate to me. He's got a lot of experience. He's pretty much ideal. I do think it's gonna be tough because there is, even some consideration within the 49ers of like, do you just promote John Lynch to like executive VP and have him be kind of like a face of the franchise, or like, kind of glorified cheerleader, and put Peters in as the real GM of the 49ers. So I don't think they'll let him go without a fight, and we'll see kind of how all that plays out, but he would be phenomenal for sure.
Yeah, and I like Rand Carthen, and it's going to sound bad the way I'm going to put it, but I like him as a consolation prize to Adam Peters. I've become an Adam Peters guy. I was a Rand Carthen guy, but I've become an Adam Peters guy. I just think that pulling from San Francisco or Buffalo, I think are my top choices, just because those teams, these guys have been with those teams for the longest time and have picked up what works, what doesn't work, good traits. With Cunningham, yeah, he does have the Ravens background, but the Ravens kind of failed to build around Lamar Jackson
But here's the thing. He left the Ravens and went to the Eagles in, I think it was 2017.
Oh, gotcha.
And so he was with
he got the good Ravens stuff.
He got the good Ravens stuff. Then he went to the Eagles. And that's the thing. Like, if you're picking general managers to learn under, like Ozzie Newsome plus Howie Roseman are like really, really high up there for me as far as just the best general managers in football. And Cunningham has that background. And the other thing, as long as I'm doing my sales pitch on Cunningham, the other thing I like about him, and this is a negative for me in the box of Rand Carthon, and there was one other one. I'm trying to remember who it was.
Was it Malik Boyd or Glenn Cook?
Maybe. No, it wasn't Malik Boyd. It was who's the other one? I think it's Quentin Harris.
Oh yeah,
but we're off of Quentin Harris anyways.
Yeah, this is an anti-Quentin Harris podcast.
Yeah.
Officially.
So to me, this is a positive for Ian Cunningham in that he has been on both the pro scouting side and the college scouting side, because Rand Carthon has only been on the pro scouting side of things. He has never been a college scout. And I think those are different roles. I do think those are different roles, because at the end of the day, like, you're evaluating NFL players, but there's so much more projection and looking at like weird schemes in college, and like, how does this guy from North Dakota State, is he going to translate to the NFL level when he's playing against guys that are wildly?
I'm going to have to correct you on Carthon, because Carthon has been a pro scout, and he's also director of player personnel after being pro personnel, and he's responsible for evaluating the top college prospects and assisting the construction of the pro free agency board and evaluation scored at sanfrancisco.com.
When did he move to that side?
2 seasons ago. So the second season he's been on the pro side. Now, he spent as a pro scout from 2008 to 2011, 4 seasons. So he's got 6 seasons specifically on the college side.
Well, wait, 6. I
4 seasons as a pro scout and 2 seasons as player personnel.
Okay, so player personnel, he may be involved more on the college side.
Yeah, it says right here he is. And that's what he is currently. He's currently player personnel.
Okay, well, then I take that back as far as a negative against him. But to me, like, it is important to me that they have experience on both sides, because, obviously a general manager is going to have a scouting staff, but you're also running the scouting staff. So, you're looking at, how much do we factor in measurables? How much do we factor in tape? How much do we factor in attitude, coaching, comments, whatever. There's a lot that goes into how you build out your scouting staff and what you're looking for and what you're saying is going to make a Titans football player for whoever the next GM is. And to me, I want somebody who's done that before on the college side. Because to me, like, free agency is important. Trading is important. All that stuff matters. But to me, like, the lifeblood of the organization is always the draft and getting guys in that fit, getting guys in that become stars, because you don't generally find stars in free agency. You
find the Ravens and 49ers are some of the best at doing that.
Right. 100%. And to me, like, his background with the Ravens and Cunningham's background with the Eagles as well, because he was part of the Eagles franchise up until he got hired to the Bears 2 years ago with Ryan Poles. So he was a big part of what built that offensive line in Philly with the Jordan Mailata pick. And Landon Dickerson and guys like that have come in and have turned into really good players, as well as some of the guys on the defensive side of the ball, like Josh Sweat, who they absolutely stole late in that draft, and guys like that. So to me, I love his background. I love who he's worked under. And really, I like everything I've read about him. So to me, my board is very clearly Peters, Cunningham, probably Boyd would be next for me, Malik Boyd from the Bills. And then I would drop down to Rand Carthon and then the rest.
I think I'm Peters, Carthon, Cunningham, Boyd. I may put Boyd above Cunningham, but you kind of talked me into Cunningham. And then Cook, and then everybody else could just go kick rocks. I want to get to some of the comments in the chat, specifically this one, in reference to us talking about Adam Peters. Why take the interview if you weren't serious about taking the position? Well, you take the interview so you can get the better job at the place that you want the job. You're essentially using them. If you're not serious and you know you can leverage the Titans interviews to get the job that you want in San Francisco, you should definitely do it. I mean, that's just good personal business for him.
And also, he hasn't accepted the interview yet, right? Yeah. They've just requested permission from the 49ers to interview him.
Another one from Josh is they paid Debo too, which is true. The former Titans GM did not trade Debo or pay AJ Brown, and that's essentially why he got fired. That was the final straw, that whole situation. And Amy says, and keeping your homegrown stars, at least now we can keep Big Jeff. J-Rob would have traded him for a third. Probably, a little bit of speculation, but I kind of side with it. And then Amy also says, I like Peters the best as well. Plus, that benefits a prior relationship with the head coach. So let's get into talking about the head coach. And comments galore. I don't know where you want to start. I think if we're talking about GMs, we know that, and we already brought it up, they obviously talked about a lack of collaboration is very important. And so alluding to a lack of collaboration with the general manager, which kind of plays into his comments about two things, injuries and his comments about speed. And I think let's start with speed first. And he is desperate for speed on this team. He knows they're rarely, by his own quote, and this is what he said, speed is a big priority for the team this offseason. As Vrabel closed out today's 30-minute plus presser with this, you want the fastest roster that you can have. You want to fast everybody. You want your D-line to be able to run. You want your corners to be able to run. Receivers, it's a fast game. So that's what you're trying to do all the time. Find as fast a players that can play football as possible. Fundamentally, he's looking for players that are physical because there is a degree of physicality that's required in this game at every level. Fundamentally sound, play with technique, and we'll get to those later because I think those are really big. But we have to get faster. We have to be a faster football team. Rarely are we the fastest team out there. Speed, which is a good sign because this team, Jon Robinson was like allergic to fast 40-time wide receivers.
He was. Yeah. And that's to me the biggest part of Vrabel's comments is he wants a faster team. And they desperately need a faster team because he's right. Like there's not enough speed on the field. And you see it when they play teams like Jacksonville, who do have a lot of speed. And you can tell like it's just a slower team. And especially on offense, that just cages you in so much. And like just not having the players that can threaten a defense and put fear into them and force them out of playing certain looks. Like Tyreek Hill, and we talk about it all the time with like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and all that stuff in Miami, completely changes how teams can defend the Dolphins. Like when those guys are on the field and they have a competent quarterback out there, of course, because that's been a problem for them. It is so hard to defend because there are just certain things you cannot do against them. They know that. They can scheme to take advantage of that. And it just puts the defense constantly on their heels. They are constantly worried about getting smoked deep, which opens up so many layups underneath for Tyreek Hill and Waddle and frankly everyone else too. So with the Titans, it's been the exact opposite. Like there is zero fear whatsoever from a defense of getting beat deep. So you can play up, you can press, you can play on your toes coming downhill on all this underneath stuff, which just makes it that much harder for your receivers to get open, makes it that much harder for your quarterback because he's constantly dealing with tight windows and a lot of route disruption. It's just like, I mean, it's totally different when you have speed on the field. And I hope, that this means, and I'm assuming that this does mean that the Titans will be targeting guys with speed in the draft and free agency coming up.
Means the 40 is more important than ever for this team when you're looking at all this stuff.
Absolutely. And even Vrabel's comment about and it was in the analytics answer, I think, when he was talking to Teron Davenport, he was saying, analytics, I think we should throw it to the fast guys or throw it deep to the fast guys. It was kind of his comment, and it's kind of tongue in cheek about, just the very simplified version of, how you use analytics for personnel decisions and stuff like that, or coaching, how it can inform play calling. But it's a point that like he wants fast guys. He wants to be able to throw the ball deep. It's not like Vrabel doesn't want to be able to do those things. I think he has built his offense around what he has available to him to work with over the last 4 years. And I think he would probably like to do something a little bit more aggressive, but has never felt like he can because of personnel limitations.
Well, that brings me to personal limitations and availability to his injury comments about blister. You could be a blister or you could be a callus. And that was very much an 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. comment to Vrabel, from Vrabel about some of these players. And he specifically mentions Christian Fulton and David Long, which I think we both kind of were on the fence whether Christian Fulton was or wasn't an 8 a.m., 4 p.m. guy. But we were clearly off the fence thinking that David Long was. But apparently, maybe these two guys specifically aren't really giving their all, and they're kind of milking these injuries to get more time off instead of building a callus to the injuries. What did you make of that blister versus callus comment specifically, and how do you think it ties in to the viewpoint of the roster and the viewpoint of Christian Fulton and David Long?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I don't know. Like the blister versus callus, he was talking about specifically like preseason prep and stuff like that, and guys taking days off for little things, and eventually, rather than letting it heal into or turn into a callus, it's just a blister that heals and pops and heals and pops and heals and pops over and over again. So it's interesting. I don't know how that equates specifically to like hamstrings, which has been the bugaboo for both Fulton and Long. But I do think training and having guys that take their conditioning and training seriously, both in the offseason and during the season, is important to Vrabel. And it sounds like he's calling out those two guys. And look, he has spoken glowingly of David Long before, so I don't think he necessarily dislikes David Long, but I think he is frustrated with the fact that it's 2 seasons in a row now that a hamstring has popped up late in the season, and David Long has basically gone on the shelf for a month and a half. And it's hard to play winning football when your best players cannot consistently be on the field, and that is the story of the 2022 and 2021 Titans, basically. So. It'll be interesting because obviously David Long is up for a contract this offseason as far as whether he stays or goes. I think he cost himself a lot of money with his hamstring injury because he was trending towards probably getting a pretty big payday had he stayed productive and stayed on the field. And then Christian Fulton, I mean, he's up for an extension too at this point because he's, got 1 year left on his rookie deal. And it does not seem likely that extension will be coming this offseason at this point. They're going to want him to show that he can stay healthy and play effective football for a full season. So it's going to go right up to free agency with him too. So it's, two guys that, certainly those are the two guys when you think about like soft tissue stuff. those are the ones that it has come up with consistently over the last 2 years. And they're important players, unfortunately, for this team. And you'd like to see David Long back, but he needs to be back and he needs to play 17 games is what it comes down to. And, maybe a 1-year contract that gives them a chance to do that, and then they can reevaluate after the season makes sense for both sides. But yeah, I'd say that very interesting.
Well, he was specifically also asked about acquiring players with injury history, which I think the word acquired, I think that was Joe Rexer, but I think using that word is the right way to frame it, because acquiring means both the draft and free agency, which Jon Robinson had a penchant for doing. And Mike Vrabel was pretty honest. He said, I don't know if that is always a predictor of the future, but in some cases it maybe was. In some cases it wasn't. He thinks that to me, that says, again, I've just been saddled with a bunch of injured players and players that have history or are recovering from injuries that re-injure themselves, and I'm sick of it. So I think we're gonna see healthy, fast players, and I'm very excited. What about you?
Yeah, that would be super exciting if that's what they end up getting. And there's some guys in the draft, like, my mind immediately obviously goes to Jalen Hyatt here locally, but then also like Zay Flowers from Boston College. Like, to me, drafting a wide receiver with some real speed is a must in this draft. I mean, yes, they need to draft offensive linemen and get as many of those guys in the door as they can too. But if you leave without this draft without a wide receiver who can really run and like take a top off a defense and be more than just, Khalif Raymond could do that to a small degree, but he was limited in the other areas of playing receiver. But if you could find somebody who is less limited on the other stuff and can also do what Khalif Raymond did, that would be a huge difference maker for this Titans offense. And to me, like, the Hyatt and Flowers are my two favorite options for that spot. And I don't know if you would have to spend a first to get one of those guys, or if that's maybe trade back to the end of the first, or maybe you get them at the top of the second kind of players. But we'll see how the draft board starts to shake out as we move along this process. But those are two guys I would very much have my eye on for the Titans early on in this draft.
Well, Mike Vrabel, talked in his presser, and of course people overreacted about how he hadn't fired anybody yet because he hasn't done his exit interviews with the coaches. And then on the other side, he also kind of alluded to the fact that while decisions could come this week, and they came that day on Monday, that the GM hiring may play a part in the process of filling out the rest of the staff, which of course has me thinking, because they're talking about collaboration. Well, if it's a 49ers, GM, or if it's a Buffalo Bills GM, could be bringing in some high quality talent. So we know that Todd Downing got fired. Obviously, that was 100% going to happen. There was no doubt in my mind for weeks on end. No doubt in my mind that he was going to get fired. Offensive line coach Keith Carter was fired. Secondary coach Anthony Midget were fired, and offensive skill assistant Eric Frazier was recently fired. And the reason I want to bring this up is I want to talk about Anthony Midget and Keith Carter, because I think those are really, to me, those are like guys that you kind of could see you're not terribly upset. But I want to go back to a comment that Vrabel made, and he said, I want it to be talking about players and the identity of his football team. The same thing I've always wanted to be: smart, tough, and fast. I want it to be physical. I still think there's a degree of physicality that is required to this game in every level, like we already said. However, fundamentally sound, play with technique. And there is no better example of position groups not doing that, not playing sound and not playing with good technique, than the offensive line and the defensive backfield, specifically the cornerbacks, who had problems and struggles all year long with proper technique, NPF, not being able to handle an inside rusher. Excuse me. Then you have all the penalties that he got, the penalties Dennis Daly got. And listen, Can't blame Keith Carter for Dennis Daly because Dennis Daly sucks, but you can't blame him for the lack of development within PF. And then you go on the flip side. Trey Avery, Roger McCreary just struggled so hard with fundamentals. Even Christian Fulton struggled with fundamentals. And they all got penalties, themselves. I see it. I see that basically that Vrabel's like, I got to get these guys out of here. I love you. I think you guys are great. You guys did what you could, but I got to get coaches that could do better.
Yeah, and I agree with all of the firings. I mean, if you look across the roster and where they were performing the worst, these are all the areas they were performing the worst. And the offensive line, I think maybe Keith Carter is the one that you could debate the most, simply because he was given nothing to work with. Because I'm not sure the best offensive line coach in the NFL is turning Dennis Daly into anything more than smoldering heap of garbage. But they also didn't get better. Like guys like Aaron Brewer didn't really get better over the course of the season. And you also had, I think there was kind of a weird thing with Dylan Radins and Keith Carter. It seemed like where Carter seemed to be the one that was driving we don't think he's a tackle train. And then finally they try him at tackle and he actually does okay. And to me, it seemed like maybe that Carter was the reason more so than, I mean, obviously Vrabel was the ultimate decision maker and could have overruled that. But it seemed to me like the feedback Vrabel was getting from Carter was that I don't think that Radins can play outside, and I don't think he could play tackle. And maybe Radins can't play tackle. We didn't see nearly enough of a sample size to really feel great about him as a tackle or whatever, but it was better than what Dennis Daly played. And the fact that they didn't try it sooner, I think, is a mark against Carter to a large degree. But obviously, Downing had to go. There was just like so many people were just like, oh, I guess they're gonna keep Downing because Vrabel's a stubborn mule and all this. And I'm like, how could they possibly sell Downing to the fan base? And I know you don't want to always listen to the fan base, but this is a team that's trying to build a brand new stadium, $2 billion stadium, and trying to get that approved. They're trying to get their fan base to buy new, more expensive PSLs and new, more expensive season tickets for this new stadium. How could you possibly spend your season selling Todd Downing to this fan base? Like, you would have nobody interested, nobody excited, no matter what they did. Like, they could go draft Bryce Young, and I'm not sure that the fan base would have been fired up about the 2023 season with Todd Downing. So they had to get rid of him. There was just no choice. It had soured way too far. But to me, them getting rid of Downing and Carter gives me a little bit of hope that maybe they'll go in a different direction offensively. Because to me, from what I understand, Carter was largely the run game coordinator. That was not his title per se, but that was something that he functioned as. So, and I think Downing talked about getting with Keith Carter, getting with Tim Kelly, kind of marrying the run game and the pass game concepts that they like for each week. So to me, maybe if you are moving on from Carter and Downing, maybe they're going to go in a different direction offensively. Maybe they'll look at some.
Because let's get into that, because I am torn, because this offense and the players that have been brought in are for this Shanahan-esque offense. Now, we have both said that Todd Downing does a piss poor job of running a Shanahan offense. And really, that's not Tim Kelly's forte either.
Right.
Which kind of plays into this whole situation, because I'm assuming that if betting odds were out for whoever is going to be the next offensive coordinator, Tim Kelly would be the overwhelming favorite with Bill O'Brien second. Like, that's how I kind of feel that this is going to go. Is that the best move, to move away from this offense that is seemingly everywhere in the NFL and is successfully ran everywhere else in the NFL and was successfully ran here in 2019 and 2020?
Yeah, I don't see. The thing to me is like the whole personnel, they're going to have to change out probably 4/5 of the offensive line. So to me,
Does it make it easier to do that if they were to switch to maybe a more, I guess it would be gap blocking would be the other side of this. If they go heavy gap blocking, is that easier to find offensive linemen that fit that?
I mean, I don't know. I would always argue that you could get by with worse offensive linemen if you're a zone scheme from a run blocking standpoint. And the Titans did okay run blocking. I think that kind of bared out for the most part this year, that they just had very little talent on the offensive line, but they were able to get by with this zone blocking scheme. But just because you're a zone blocking or zone running team doesn't necessarily mean you have to fall into the same offense necessarily, because even like McVay versus Shanahan branches of this offensive tree are different. Like they've got different elements. So I hope the Titans aren't necessarily married to the current offense. I think Tannehill runs it well. I think it fits Tannehill's skill set in a lot of ways, but I also think you could probably do something else with him. I mean, you could run some other offenses with Tannehill. And since you are trading out like basically the whole starting offensive line anyways, maybe it does make sense that, hey, if you're going to make a big change on offense, this is the year to do it, because you're going to have to teach it to, 4 new starters on the offensive line anyways. And, you're going to be looking at, you've got young guys at receiver and tight end for the most part. And, it's not like they're baked into the system at this point as like 4-year vets or anything like that. So I think maybe you go a totally different route here. And I would love to see what Vrabel chooses to do. I think that'll be very interesting and telling about the future of this franchise, whether it's
describe Ryan Day's offense compared to what the offense you see in the with the Titans currently, because wouldn't you think that because he wanted Ryan Day at one point that maybe that is the kind of offense he's leaning towards?
Yeah, so Ryan Day is really at the end of the day, he's like a Chip Kelly disciple more than anything, and he runs kind of the power spread, which is a run. I mean, the fact of the matter is that all colleges run the ball more than they throw the ball. That's just the way that college football works for the most part, or almost. I should say almost all colleges, not the air raid guys, but he runs a power spread, so they run the ball a lot. They run the ball, physically downhill, all that stuff, which I think Vrabel appreciates. Vrabel still wants an element of physicality, but when they do throw, and a lot of the running is out of shotgun. That's kind of the big difference to me, is they're going to run a lot out of the gun. They don't run as much under center, not as much, traditional, under center zone stuff that what the Titans and Shanahan and all these other guys do. So it's more of a gun power run scheme, and then in the passing game, they're going to spread it out and throw the ball around a little bit. So and they they marry it all up, so that you get your personnel packages and everything like that. You're versatile and things like that. But that is the biggest difference. Is it's going to be mostly in the gun. It's still going to have a power run element, but you're going to be a little bit more spread out in the passing game.
All right, let's get into some candidates real quick. Tim Kelly, obviously, like we said, overwhelming favorite. Bill O'Brien is also probably going to be thrown in there just because of, past ties with, Vrabel in New England and such like that.
Yeah.
I think I'm at this point where I don't like either of these guys, but specifically in the year, I've been very pro Tim Kelly. Just get him a chance to maybe pull something out of his ass. But at this point, we don't know in this offense, but in behind the scenes, what a passing game coordinator actually does for Mike Vrabel. But if it's true to the title, we have to just take into account the passing game sucked. It was bad. What he's responsible for versus what Todd Downing was responsible for, what the personnel allows you to do, up in the air. At this point, I'd like to see Tim Kelly have been let go at some point. That way, that gives me a little bit more comfort. But you can't bring in Bill O'Brien to come back and work with Tim Kelly, in my mind. It's got to be one or the other. I don't think both can coexist unless they have patched things up, because Bill O'Brien basically fired Tim Kelly and threw him under the bus and did all this stuff. So you obviously can't have both.
Yeah, I'm souring a bit on Tim Kelly as like the guy, because I was excited when they brought him in, as far as like, hey, this guy, he's got some other ideas. He's not necessarily just a, you know, Shanahan disciple type, so I thought maybe he'd bring some other elements to the offense, but nothing really showed. And look, PK has talked about this consistently all season, that whenever he's been out of practice, Tim Kelly has been basically working with the tight ends, and he views him as like a glorified tight ends coach. Now, when they go in the building, that may be different. Like, it may be that Tim Kelly does work with the tight ends at practice because they had a young tight ends coach and Luke Steckel. But when they go in the building, Tim Kelly is more involved in the actual design of the passing game, picking out things, scheming, whatever. That's entirely possible, and all, maybe it's likely, frankly. But I wish they would go in a different direction. I think going outside of the comfort zone a little bit, and people will balk at it because he was not successful as a head coach, but I would like them to go get Cliff Kingsbury. I mean, I think Cliff Kingsbury is a good offensive mind. I think he's a good play caller. I think he's been
Do you think he's a good play caller? Because that's where I kind of struggle a little bit with his play calling feel. Like, I think that it's the sequencing and stuff like that. That's where I kind of am. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to see him here, because I think his offenses have always been pretty successful. I mean, this year was not great because of the, basically he was without Nuke Hopkins for the first 6 games of the season, and then he was without Kyler Murray for the last 5 or 6. And I think he missed a few games even in between there too. So to me, Kingsbury had no shot this year because he was in the same position that the Titans were in a large degree, because there were just no personnel out there for the Cardinals. Colt McCoy and Robbie Anderson
Trace
just ain't getting
McSorley.
it done. So I would definitely be in on Kingsbury. I think the fact that Vrabel had Kingsbury here last year for a joint practice. Vrabel tends to do that with guys that he knows and respects. He does have a history with Kingsbury. They were teammates in New England very briefly, but Kingsbury's year in New England as a backup quarterback got him his jump start into coaching. He is considered to be very, very bright by Bill Belichick, by people that Vrabel, in the circle of coaches that he comes from and that he knows, Kingsbury is respected. So to me, that seems to be a guy that would make a lot of sense. And then other guys, I think Brian Johnson, the quarterback coach for the Eagles, would be a guy I'd like them to talk to. That maybe my favorite candidate would be Brian Callahan from the Bengals, who has been a hot coaching name for a long time, is not the play caller for Cincinnati because Zach Taylor still handles that. So that would be the situation where, kind of like with LaFleur, where he was offensive coordinator by title, but he was not a play caller. So you can interview him and offer him a play calling offensive coordinator position, and he may want to take it. That may be like the last thing he feels like he needs to get on his resume before he goes and takes a head coaching job.
Bring his dad in for offensive line coach.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, if he could do that, if we could take that combo, I would 100% in a heartbeat take that one. But again, like, that would be another LaFleur situation where he's probably going to be a head coach in a year or two.
You had Bears offensive line coach Chris Morgan on here,
yeah.
And I find that extremely odd. Why did that name pop up on your radar where the offensive line was pretty terrible for the Chicago Bears?
Well, the Bears were able to run the shit out of the ball this year. They were one of the best rushing offenses in the NFL, and I think that's a big part of what Morgan did for them. But he also, I mean, he was previously with the Falcons, and he was offensive line coach there for the Falcons, and this was during the Shanahan heyday era of the Falcons. So again, if you want to stay within this Shanahan framework of the offense, Chris Morgan's going to be a guy that's got a lot of skins on the wall from that standpoint. He was also with Shanahan in Washington. back before then. So he is a Shanahan guy. Like, he is a Shanahan disciple. And, having dealt with a little bit different offense this year with the Bears, obviously designing this run game for Justin Fields, I think that's an interesting skill set for him as an offensive coordinator candidate. So I do like Chris Morgan a good bit. I've heard good things about him from, people that are connected, or read good things about him from people that are connected, and, because that's the tough thing with all these assistant coaches, right? And projecting them forward, because people will also ask, like, well, who do you think they should hire for secondary coach? I have no fucking clue. Because once you get down below a certain level, it's so hard to even know anything about any of these guys, because just there's no information out there. Like, there's not interviews, there's not, the best way to get information is from, like, very, very deeply sourced reporters finding out who teams are talking about as, like, rising star kind of coaches. So I don't have any idea on position coaches, but you look at a guy like Chris Morgan, his background, who he's coached under. I like the coaches that he's kind of cut his teeth under and would likely be modeling in an offensive coordinator role.
That's interesting, and I think a name that I didn't think about. I did think about this other name, but the first name, Todd Monken, didn't even cross my mind, because I forgot that he even existed, even though that he's in Georgia going crazy, and he's proven that he's a good play caller in the NFL as well. And then you also have Joe Brady, which on the flip side, really great in college, not a great play caller in the NFL. So I'm very curious. Obviously get why you like Todd Monken. I think he should be on the radar. I think he'll be a hot commodity for many NFL teams needing an OC, and maybe a few teams that need a head coach. But Joe Brady, why is this guy coming back into our lives here? Is it just because that they have shown interest before? He doesn't seem like a guy that's very good at the pro level. Am I being too harsh on him?
It's kind of a tough thing with Joe Brady, because, I mean, he was the super hot name when he went down to LSU and had that crazy season. But now, like, looking back on it, we also look at that and go, look, those guys were wildly talented, like, just insanely talented at LSU that year. But, he goes to Carolina. He had nothing to work with. I mean, again, like, we're talking about a guy who was stuck with, like, what they had, like, old Cam Newton there one of those years that he was there. They had no real, like, talent outside of DJ Moore and Christian McCaffrey, who's always, hurt for half a season. It didn't work out that well in Carolina, obviously. But then he goes to Buffalo. So he's been with Buffalo since he got canned from the offensive coordinator role in Carolina. And he's been working under, obviously, what's his name, who's now with the Giants?
Brian Daboll.
And then this year under Ken Dorsey. So I like that he's been in Buffalo. He's shown the ability to be a good play caller before, because even with all that talent at LSU, you still have to call the plays. You still have to put them in position to be successful. And it's not like they had wild success offensively the previous year at LSU before he arrived. And Joe Burrow was the starter the previous year. And I think, Jamar Chase was there. Not T. Higgins. Justin Jefferson had been there before. So he took those guys to another level, in my opinion. And I think sometimes a guy is just better at a job the second time around. You learn what works, what didn't work, and maybe he comes in here and can do a lot better job in Tennessee. So I think he'd at least be worth talking to and seeing where he'd want to take this offense.
I'm going to throw a name out there that I quote tweeted your list that we just ran through with Thomas Brown, who is a hot name, who's been on my radar for the last year and a half. And he's a hot name, big McVay guy, big guy in NFL circles that everybody seems to talk about as a future head coach. He's the current assistant head coach and running backs coach for the LA Rams. And I think he's an intriguing option if you're looking to bring in someone to try to get the offense back on track, and as an assistant head coach, he's privy to a lot of meetings, to a lot of the other stuff that is going on behind the scenes. While he has no play calling experience, from everything I've read and watched about Thomas Brown, it seems like to me that whoever gives him the shot at least an offensive coordinator is going to have a future head coach come from their staff, which, by the way, comp picks. But I think that you're talking about a guy that will really help this team. I love that he's comes from the running back side of things, but I love that he was promoted to assistant head coach almost immediately upon being hired by the LA Rams, because he's only been with the LA Rams for 3 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. As far as getting an up and coming head coach, I like that to a certain degree, but it does worry me a little bit that if they're going to be in this situation where they're constantly churning through offensive coordinators. Now, I think like there's pluses. Like if you're consistently losing offensive coordinators to head coaching roles, then they're probably doing a pretty great job for you while you're there, or while they're with that offensive coordinator job. So I think that's a plus. But part of me does that's part of what I kind of like about Kingsbury too. Just going back to him for a second, is that he's probably not getting another head coaching job anytime soon. I think he's kind of shown he's not a great head coach, but he might just be a better offensive coordinator. And so maybe he sticks, and maybe he's like the McDaniels to, Vrabel's Belichick here long term. So that's one thing that kind of appeals to me about a Kingsbury or even a Bill O'Brien. It'd be real hard for me to see someone giving him another head coaching job anytime soon. That's kind of appealing to me, but I will say, Thomas Brown is an interesting name. I do like the idea of giving him that opportunity. And
better to have a coach for an extremely awesome coach for 2 years that eventually gets hired by someone else than to have an average coach for 15 years.
Agreed. Yeah, I definitely agree. You would rather get the best coach possible and worry about if they get hired later.
But I did think it was interesting in the press conference by Vrabel, which we haven't talked about, his comments about putting his trust in the staff, and staff basically coaches not keeping their head elsewhere and keeping their head inside the building. I thought that was a little interesting, basically that they're not looking for other job opportunities, which I think is going to be interesting about this offensive coordinator hire. I thought that was really telling. The last one on the list, and I want to bring this up just because I want to make fun of someone that was in your replies. You tweeted, I wouldn't be opposed to O'Brien, but he's not necessarily my preferred choice. Definitely think Tim Kelly's the most likely option, though I'm not sure I'd love that either. Fully agree. Reich would be great, but I think he ends up in Jacksonville or Philly if he doesn't get a head coaching job. So you said Reich would be great. Right underneath this quote, right underneath this tweet, at Ryan J. Paradise says, if Reich doesn't land in Jacksonville or Philly, would you like him here? Hello. You literally said he would be great. What were you thinking here?
Yeah, I'm not
regardless, sure. You think Reich would be great. You're a big Reich believer. I like Reich as an offensive coordinator. I think he's one of those guys that maybe is kind of like Mike Zimmer or Norv Turner, where they're better coordinators than they are head coaches. So where would you put this chance, this Frank Reich? Because that is the big name, because he was obviously, everybody knows him from the Colts. Everybody knows him from the Eagles. And that's like the most popular fan name, I feel like, is Frank Reich. That's the one that gets thrown out a lot.
Yeah, and look, to me, it's less likely that he ends up here, because if Shane Steichen gets a head coaching job, who is currently the Eagles offensive coordinator, and I think he will, Frank Reich seems like a slam dunk to go back to Philly and work under that staff over there. And
can you go and work under someone that was working under you?
I think he would, because unless he's going to get a head coach job somewhere else. I mean, which I think he'll get interviews for head coaching jobs. I'm not sure if he'll land one or not. But I would be shocked if Shane Steichen gets a head coaching job and Frank Reich does not. I would be shocked if Frank Reich does not end up in Philadelphia, because he and Nick Sirianni have a ton of respect for each other. I think Sirianni would be begging him to come work there. and take that over. And obviously, it's a great opportunity with a ton of talent. I mean, why would he not want to go back there at this point? And then the other one, like Jacksonville, I would say, there's certainly an opportunity, you would think, for Peterson to try to recruit him back to Jacksonville, even if it's just as even if it's not as the offensive coordinator, because they do have an offensive coordinator who's done, I would say a pretty decent job this year. But
kind of like a Jim Schwartz kind of role where you get to do something. We'll just keep
on the staff, he can help, that kind of thing. I think Reich would probably do that because it's like the relationships. He has the relationships with Doug Peterson. He has the relationship with Nick Sirianni and the Eagles organization. Obviously, he has a relationship with Vrabel. I think they have mutual respect. But why would he choose to come here versus those two places, which have their quarterbacks are set for the future. They have some receiving talent. They've got competent offensive line play. There would be no reason for him to want to come here over either of those two spots where he has pre-existing relationships anyway. So I just think it's highly unlikely that Reich ends up as the offensive coordinator for the Titans. So I would just put it out of your mind right now.
I agree too. And we're a big no on Nathaniel Hackett. This is an anti-Nathaniel Hackett podcast.
100%. I'm out.
There's no reason to bring Nathaniel Hackett here. That will do it for the big news cycle wrap up. If you're a Broadway insider, we appreciate all the guys and ladies that came in to the chat and hung out with us. We're brought to you by Jasper's Next Evolution Sports Bar over on West End. 2-for-1 beers on Sunday. Go and watch it. They're in a Nashville Predators headquarters, so go watch them there. Mike, you're going to be writing about what this week on podcarsky.com?
I'm going to be writing about the GM and offensive coordinator searches and where I like some of what I talked about here, but I'll get a little bit deeper into that stuff.
And that will be over at paulkarski.com. Go get a membership over there. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike Herndon NFL. My name is Zach Lyons. You can follow me on Twitter at FWordspot. You can read my works over at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. Big announcement being made on the football show. If you're listening to this on today, or if you're listening to this on Wednesday, Thursday, 1 p.m., big announcements are going to be made. You should tune in live for those announcements. It'll be really good for you guys to tune in. I would greatly appreciate it. But this is Football and Other F Words. I'm Zach. He's Mike. You have just been effed.